Welcome back, Gadgeteers. I finally felt well enough to go ahead and do some benchmarking on my 3950X. If you haven't seen the previous video, I installed the 3950X and do a couple of basic benchmarks at the very end. This video, I do a suite of benchmarks, and I do Cinebench, but I want to point out that Cinebench is the only Windows benchmark that I did. All the other benchmarks were performed in Linux against other systems, and I'm probably going to phase Cinebench out and replace it with something else that is Linux specific. So I'm looking for benchmarks that are coded for Linux, even if they're proprietary like Geekbench. Alright, let's have a look. Starting with Geekbench 4 scores, we can see that the 3950X does extremely well on multi-core. It does reasonably well on single-core. I was hoping to see better on single-core over the Ryzen 7 2700X. The ThinkPad P1, you can see the Xeon 2176 there, actually does slightly better on single core than the Ryzen 9. Makes me wonder if that processor had more cores, what would we be seeing in the multi-core? Quite a leap from the Ryzen 7 1700 to the Ryzen 9 3950X. So if you are on the Ryzen 7 1000 series, it might be something that you may want to consider advancing to. And it doesn't have to be a 3950X, it could be a 3900, a 3800, 3700, whatever your budget allows you to do. And of course, down at the bottom here we have the i7 4790 Dell 9020, which is a very popular system people are getting to turn into a inexpensive gaming machine. And you can see that single core, it's relatively decent. It's not comparing well to the 3950X or the top three machines there, but it is decent. With Geekbench 5, again, we can see the 3950X does quite well, and that multi-core score is excellent if you are rendering video or doing anything processor intensive. Now, Cinebench scores, those are the ones I'm thinking of dropping because we're not actually benchmarking the hardware in Linux, we're benchmarking the hardware in Windows, and my point is not only the hardware but Linux as well. 3950X does reasonably well. It has a Radeon RX 580 in it, giving it a frame rate of 156.27. The next one on the list as far as frame rate goes is the ThinkPad P1, and the ThinkPad P1 has the NVIDIA Quadro P2000 with 4 GB of GDDR5 memory. So that's a reasonable score to expect with that one. The Ryzen 7 2700X and the Ryzen 7 1700 both use the same graphics card as the 3950X, so we can see that when you upgrade the processor, you can see at least some change in the frame rate. Cinebench scores, processor-wise, on R15, the 3950X pretty much knocks it out of the park, which I'm actually pretty happy with since it's the CPU I have now, but comparing it to the Ryzen 7 2700X, there's quite a difference there, and it can be seen in real-world benchmarking too, which we'll get to in just a minute. Cinebench Release 20, again, the 3950X is way up there, and it soundly trounces this Ryzen 7 2700X on the multi-core score, which actually surprised me. So I'm kind of curious what the Cinebench benchmarking software is doing there to make such an incredible difference. Here we have the 4K 2-minute render test that I like to run in Kdenlive when I do the 4K render wars between various systems. Well, I was hoping there would be a larger difference between the 3950X and the 2700X. Of course, there is quite a large difference between the 1700 and the Xeon processor. I believe the reason why we're not seeing a huge jump on this particular render test is because we're using .mov files that came from my iPhone. My experience has been, and you can go back and look in the first video I do about the 3950X towards the end, if they are MP4 files that are encoded with H.265, the render times are vastly different. The 2700X, I did a test render on a video and it came out in 90 minutes. I did the same render with the 3950X and I was stunned that it came out in 22 minutes. So there is a big difference. I'm not so sure there's such a big difference when you're using the MOV type of file. Alright, we take that same video file and we go into Handbrake, the video file that was produced by Kdenlive, and we go into Handbrake and we render it from 4K down to 1080p. And looking at the Ryzen 7 2700X between the 3950X, that is a considerable difference, almost twice as fast. And the Xeon, by its own right, is incredibly fast for a 6-core processor. It does an excellent job. But I really am impressed with this score. And when you're thinking about real-world testing, you can see that the 3950X is making quite a difference. So you should be able to see at least double the performance with the 3950X over a 2700X if that's what you have. And this last one I really wasn't going to show, but I thought I'd let you see it and take a look at it for yourself. I like to take a game that has a native port for Linux, and in this case it's Witcher 2. What all these systems have in common is they are all using the RX 580 Radeon video card. I've just moved it from system to system. I saw a little bit of difference between the 1700 and the 2700X, but really very little difference between the 2700X and the 3950X. So I am not a gamer by any stretch of the imagination, but what I see, at least with this video card, is I've probably reached the limit of its performance potential, and changing the processor isn't going to make it much better. If I wanted to get real-world scores between the three systems, I might be better off getting a faster video card. However, I do not have the 1700 and 2700X, but I would like to see what the Ryzen 9 is capable of as far as frame rate goes. We said we weren't going to talk about Windows, but the Ryzen 9 3950X, when running in Windows, has a vastly superior frame rate, over double what you're seeing here. So it's not really a hardware limitation of the RX 580. It's a limitation of either the operating system or the game itself. And I'll try to bring up a couple more games that are native to Linux and see how they fare compared to their Windows counterparts. It's possible there will be a decent discrepancy between the two operating systems. Alright, that's all I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed taking a look at some of these benchmarks with me. Some are real world, some not so much so. I'm looking to replace these. If you have any suggestions about what I can replace Cinebench with that has native Linux code, even if it is proprietary, let me know. We'll definitely be keeping Geekbench 4 and 5 around, but we're looking for performance in Linux. It's okay if we're doing a comparison between Linux, in this case Geekbench 4 or 5, I could do Linux and Windows OS, or down here with a game, we could compare Windows versus Linux in that case. But I don't like to change more than one thing at a time, so I don't want to change hardware and operating system, and also I like to keep it Linux based. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I think by this time you've heard it enough times with other videos and you know what to do. Like and subscribe. If you really didn't like it, drop me a comment. Don't just dislike it. Let me know what you don't like about it. And more importantly, give me some constructive criticism so I can make my videos better for you. Thanks again. See you next time. This video was made possible with support from viewers like you. If you find this video useful, consider becoming a patron for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/fastgadgets.